I apologize for having to make this, my first complaint, anonymously, but in a violent society it is sometimes prudent and necessary, otherwise the men of violence and their friends use their violence to shut down, corrupt, or curb freedom of speech. As one of them infamously pointed out, they haven't gone away, you know. I also apologize for the length of the complaint, though in my defense I am complaining about the corrupt political output of a public broadcasting organization, while also providing evidence. I am a Northern Ireland citizen, tired of watching the majority of the population disenfranchised. Irrespective of ethnicity, it's time the people of the province were allowed to live their lives normally, without a fanatical, obsessed section of the 29.1% Republican population, monopolizing BBC NI. This OfCom complaint submission is made up of two components. The first is this written summary, submitted to OfCom along with the YouTube link. The second is the YouTube channel video, providing supporting evidence for the complaint and opening up the discussion. Using the summary as a vocal narration with relevant evidential video clips, but also including additional narration. As my complaint is about a public service digital medium, the videos are necessary as supporting evidence. As there is currently a total monopoly in all BBC Northern Ireland current affair presenters, I make, or see, no difference between the programmes aired on BBC Northern Ireland. The monopoly, created intentionally by management, has been in operation for many years. Unfortunately, as the decision not to air, or provide the public, alternative perspectives, was made, it is clear that they misguidedly agree, and are comfortable with the fact that the content and method of delivery complies with their civic responsibilities. Before detailing my complaint, I would like to make the observation that BBC Northern Ireland complaints procedure is not fit for purpose. It is not a complaints procedure per se, not even a procedure, it is a very basic one-step notification system. This relies on a technique called bouncing, or churn, to make complaints go away. You make a complaint, they give you an adjusted stock reply that may or may not answer your complaint. As there is no automatic escalation to the next stage or direct communication, even if you ask for it to be escalated, as I did on the second submission, you then have to repeat the process to submit another supplemental complaint, in order to progress your problem, making the process as difficult and impersonal as possible for the person complaining. Once this is done a number of times, people will inevitably give up. BBC NI is then off the hook. While not my official complaint, it is the convoluted process I was subjected to while making my complaint, so would be obliged if you could take whatever action you can, to help in sorting out the problem. My actual complaint is that BBC NI only serves the fanatical, obsessed activist proportion of the 29.1% of Republicans in NI that would actually vote for a united Ireland in the event of a referendum. The remaining 70.9% of the Northern Ireland population have to listen to a diet of Republican propaganda, left trying to disseminate the truth and facts from the misinformation being promoted. Broadcasters justifying their actions by cynically allowing the exaggeration and convolution of the current relationship between religion and politics, living in the past. BBC NI's parent company BBC are currently in the middle of sorting out a left-wing takeover of their current affairs programs, following an inquiry. They have already replaced a number of high-profile personnel in a process they have only started, and they had multiple presenters to deal with, not a monopoly of one. You would think, with the very public, extremely strong link between the extreme international and often violent left-wing, in politics and the NI Republican parties, a publicly funded BBC NI management would have taken the hint and sorted their problem out before being forced to. The left and right wings in GB corrupt current affairs information by spreading propaganda. The left and right wings in NI corrupt information, spread propaganda, kill and maim people in pursuit of their ambitions. It is infinitely more important to sort out the problem in NI, to save lives. To expand, just like the BBC historically, discrimination and propaganda generated in BBC Northern Ireland manifests itself in a number of ways. 1. Questioning is obviously at the discretion of the interviewer, so in this case is steered to avoid awkward questions for Irish Republican supporters and their fellow travellers, accepting as fact propositions that would be challenged by anyone not obsessed with Republican ideology, let alone a Catholic or Protestant, open-minded pro-union supporter or unionist.
DUP claims it's justified, you've just made the point again, justified in blocking the formation of a Stormont executive because the issue of the protocol is such a threat, as you see it, to the constitutional position of Northern Ireland. Just to remind you, the DUP got 21.3% of first preference votes in May. That's just over a fifth. The other four main parties, which disagree with your abstentionist tactics, secured over 62% of first preference votes between them. How is that democratic?
Let me go back to Kate's point first. She says she doesn't know what it is the DUP are looking for and that this is about identity. That is wrong, and this is part of a common theme from the other parties to trivialise or to make light of the real concerns that we have. And of course, we have set out what needs to happen. We have set out our 7 tests which indicate and show the way forward and what needs to happen in order for Stormont to be restored. So I think it would be good if people would acknowledge and listen to that. The point you make in relation to the election is that we have a system of government in Northern Ireland that's based on consensus. It's based on cross-community support. And the Democratic Unionist Party speaks for the Unionist people of Northern Ireland. And the Unionist people have made it clear that there's not a sustainable basis for devolution while the protocol remains in place.
Well, not all Unionists agree with that position. The DUP, as I said to you,
issues.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay on the line. The DUP at the last election got just over 21%. The other 4 parties, including another major unionist party, got 62% of first preference votes, but you are holding all the other parties and the entire country to ransom. And I'll just ask you again, how is that democratic?
Because the system of government here in Northern Ireland operates on the basis of consensus and power sharing, and we represent the unionist.
But that's not consensus. That's not consensus. 62% is a very significant majority, and 21% is a minority. That's not consensus. That is called a veto, is it not?
So, because we're in a minority, all of a sudden that means that we don't count. Whenever nationalism was in a minority, it was very important that their views were listened to and they were on board. But what you're saying now, Mark, is because unionists are in the minority, that doesn't matter anymore, or that doesn't count.
I don't think you take the same view whenever it comes to Brexit, do you? Look, the problem surely is your party stands accused of inconsistency on this issue. A number of years ago, when Sinn Féin was refusing to sit in an executive for over 1,000 days, as you like to point out, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson appeared on Question Time on BBC One, and here's what he said then.
In the background are the comments of the late Mr. David Trimble, official Unionists, Northern Ireland's signatory to the Good Friday Agreement, made in his book about the protocol and whose successor is mentioned in the interview as a main Unionist party. This interview is pure propaganda of the worst kind. At the dehumanizing stage of indoctrination, ramping up division, hate, targeted solely at supporters and potential supporters, demonizing, disregarding, marginalizing, unionist or pro-union supporters. The propagandist's task is to show their supporters and potential supporters that their enemy, unionists, do not deserve fair treatment because of previous bad behavior, that it is okay to ignore their rights, point of view and humanity, as these people are totally unreasonable, beyond the pale, to be despised. If this was coming from a Republican guest to the show, it would be unpleasant, even dangerous, but understandable, as it is a Republican trope, part of their propaganda. For a public service presenter to ignore a large section of the community, the Constitution and the Anglo-Irish Agreement, is not only shocking but very dangerous. This was not a professional political interview, it is a very personal, bar-level, sectarian attack on a whole community, with a total lack of empathy and understanding for anything other than his own extreme Republican point of view. When in trouble, he even managed to delve deep, reviving the old Brexit trope, reminding his supporters just how evil these people and their supporters were, as they had supported the evil Brexit. Dehumanizing is an important stage in any radical propaganda campaign, and is one of the techniques used by both Hitler and Putin to manipulate their supporters. BBC and I need to get the problem sorted, as a matter of urgency. After this stage the violence starts, and they will be the main cheerleader and promoter. Really simple basic questions like, what would be the practical and financial benefits or debits, for someone identifying as a Northern Ireland citizen, in joining a united Ireland, are never, ever discussed, and in some cases blocked by the presenter when raised by others. This is the information that is critical to NI citizens to equip them with the information they need to make an informed decision on their future. 2. Questions are also in some cases banned without explanation, such as when unionists compare their current political abstentionist actions, with previous and current extensive abstentionist behavior, of Republican political parties. They are told that is not up for discussion, we will discuss that at another time, ignored or simply move on.
Medium enterprises, that's what they
These are
want.
points that we made, absolutely made to Sinn Féin when you kept the Assembly down for 1,044 days, Chris, because on the issue that mattered to you.
All right.
This is
We're out of time, folks.
we have to have this change. We have to get stability in Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, I think you both want stability.
Republican political parties are currently abstaining from taking their seats in Westminster, for political objectives. The Republican position is totally hypocritical. Keeping this discussion out of the public debate at all costs is BBC NI's top priority. The public must not be reminded of the Republican hypocrisy. BBC NI realized that this would totally mess up their Republican propaganda, but blocking the discussion has also exposed their bigotry and sectarianism. 3. The more ardent a pro-union representative is, the more he is treated in a hostile, offensive, abusive, condescending and aggressive manner, while extreme Republicans and even reformed murderers or terrorists are treated with civility and Ireland.
All you have in this interview, Mark, is, from your perspective, an opportunity to deride, to demean TUV and the people who vote for us. Now, if you think that isn't sending, if you think that,
just like
sorry,
I did
no,
with
no,
Colum Eastwood.
no, if you think
Those
that,
aren't my figures.
if you think that isn't
Those are
sending,
the
if you
electorate
think that
figures.
isn't sending a very clear message that you and the BBC are in the business of trying to demean the people.
One unionist politician was even asked why he bothered to stand for election, every individual's basic right in a democracy. Challenging, even aggressive interviewing keeps democracy healthy, politicians honest and the public well informed. If in contrast that aggression is targeted at one section of the community, with the other section treated in a sympathetic, considerate and friendly manner, you have straightforward discrimination. No Republican has ever had such regular assault on their views or character in BBC NI. The problem is so bad that on a regular basis you get the interviewer and Republican representative ganging up on the unionist. In this clip the interviewer openly smirks at the unionist when he is being aggressively questioned. Behavior that would be unacceptable in a normal social environment, let alone on television. There are also many instances that Republican guests sit smugly back smirking at unionists when they see them under pressure. Videos of this are available on my channel. For Republicans, a totally safe environment, free of stress, risk and danger-free, they know they will not get embarrassed by difficult questions, and if any do arise the interviewer will help them out, by changing the direction of the discussion, finishing the discussion altogether or just totally disallowing the challenge. They have nothing to worry about, they don't get the same treatment as unionists. 4. The current BBC NI policy is misrepresenting and causing division in the Northern Ireland population, but then remember the old adage, divide and conquer. Maybe that's what it's supposed to do. Complaints of bias in BBC NI are common from both unionist politicians and others. 5. Religion is a consistent tool in BBC NI, used as propaganda to polarize the community, causing division and violence, with Roman Catholics constantly labelled as Republican supporters, as supporters of a united Ireland, all Protestants as unionists and all unionists as supporters of the DUP, in spite of very clear evidence that this divide is much more complex than that, as it was historically.
Dr. Paul Nolan talking about the challenge for unionism in these figures earlier today. He said the numbers point to the fact that unionism is on an ice floe that's melting. Do you accept there's only one direction this is going?
Well, we've heard a lot of very dramatic language today, but the reality is there hasn't been a significant change from what we heard during the election. The figures are roughly the same, so there's nothing new here. Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland identity is a very complex thing. We've known that for a long time. We have a number of minorities on both from either community and in the centre. So we're now a Northern Ireland of minorities. We've been in that position for many, many years. So I think that maybe people need to calm down a little bit. Really, there hasn't been anything that significantly new about this that we didn't know
well, there is
in
something
the
that's
last
new. It
election.
is for the first time there are fewer people with a Protestant background in Northern Ireland than a Catholic background. That is new, that's a fact.
That's an incredibly reductive way to look at it. I'm really surprised by the number of people running around talking about sort of a sectarian headcount based on religion. We know
But
that
it's not just that, it's more than that as well though. The percentage of people who identify as British is down, the number of people from a Protestant background, as we've said, is down, the number of people with UK passports is down. Those are the facts.
Look, we can trade figures. I can say, for example, that 29% of people identify as Irish. That's actually less than identified 100 years ago in the census. There are figures that we can talk about here, but the reality is this census reflects really the election figures that we saw in the last Assembly election, and I think we need to be really careful in this day and age. Of course, we're living in a much more secular society, so I think less people are identifying as Protestant or Catholic, but we cannot simply assume by somebody's religion what way they would vote in a border poll. And I'm really quite dismayed by the types of people running around using that in that way. We shouldn't be reductive, we shouldn't be sectarian on this. The reality is, everything is still to play for.
Dr. Paul Nolan, a person BBC NI misquoted in one episode to justify their sectarian rants. The actual quotation from Dr. Paul Nolan was, "If it appears to be standing on an ice floe that is shrinking beneath its feet." BBC NI claimed that what was said was, "Unionism is on an ice floe that is shrinking beneath its feet." The original statement was speculative. The BBC NI quote was definitive. With just a little more reading they could have discovered that what the doctor was referring to was unionism being redefined as a more up-to-date model, with old-fashioned unionism shrinking. The whole point of this complaint, and the good doctor is agreeing. With a little research they would also have discovered that the good doctor had rubbished the premise they were presenting on a number of occasions. Dr. Paul Nolan, quote 1. Though, the point that not all Catholics are nationalists is generally accepted but frequently forgotten, when forecasts are made, and this matter, when it comes to discussion of the census and a potential border poll. Dr. Paul Nolan, quote 2. Is this then the unionist nightmare coming true? Not if past voting patterns provide any guide to future electoral behavior. The demographic shift in favor of Catholics has not translated into any significant advance in the nationalist vote since the Good Friday Agreement. Dr. Paul Nolan, quote 3. Mr. Nolan pointed out that although 45% identified in the 2011 census as being from a Catholic background, only 25% claimed an exclusively Irish identity. Dr. Paul Nolan, quote 4. He highlighted another statistic. Roughly, he said, the share of the Sinn Féin SDLP vote in 1998 was 39%, and the share of the Sinn Féin SDLP vote today is 39%. It hasn't changed. Notice the word illusion in the first quote, the basis of whole BBC NI programme. The premise they presented on the programme was an illusion. BBC NI made sure Dr. Paul Nolan was not on the programme in person to present his views to the public, ensuring he didn't spoil their fairy tale with the truth. BBC NI had used the Catholic majority to justify their programme about the census in the first place, a fact. There was a majority, but an illusion that it was currently a threat, sectarian and propaganda, without the other comments to balance the programme. A common-sense qualification that a Catholic head count should not be used when it comes to discussion of census data, or potential border poll implications, as even with a majority, it wouldn't change the status quo, was nowhere to be found from BBC NI. If BBC NI had been accurate, not selective on the information they transmitted, there would not have been a programme. It was only news, by ignoring the facts, would only be useful as propaganda, if transmitted in the way it was. The Northern Ireland population were misled and division promoted. In what other country would it be allowed to have such an oversimplified sectarian headcount transmitted as serious political debate? Well, even historically it wasn't true. In Northern Ireland it is getting increasingly more complex with time. Which could be why Republicans seem to be getting panicky and clutching at historical straws. BBC NI would appear to be trying to create a sectarian crisis, appealing to the tribal instincts of sections of the population, to increase support for Republican ideals by appealing to sectarian community loyalties. Propaganda, in other words. Let's now have some facts, without the propaganda. In the 2021 Northern Ireland census, British only, 606,300 people or 31.9% of Northern Ireland's population. Irish only, 554,400 people or 29.1% of Northern Ireland's population. Northern Irish only, 376,400 people or 19.8% of Northern Ireland's population. British and Northern Irish only, 151,300 or 8.0% of Northern Ireland's population. Irish and Northern Irish only, 33,600 or 1.8% of Northern Ireland's population. British, Irish and Northern Irish only, 28,100 or 1.5% of Northern Ireland's population. British and Irish only, 11,800 or 0.6% of Northern Ireland's population. Other only, 113,400 people or 6.0% of Northern Ireland's population. BBC Northern Ireland totally ignore this census diversity in their programmes, promoting and focusing totally on the one statistic that supports their agenda, that the Catholic population is now in the majority. Promoting the sectarian theme that more Catholics are a direct threat to Unionists. Keeping themselves and trying to keep us all trapped in the sectarian past, divided and increasing sectarian divisions and tensions. For BBC NI to take from the census that an increase in the Roman Catholic population is a threat to Unionists, and by implication the Northern Ireland state, is totally blinkered and partisan. Either you need to replace your managers and researchers, or you are seeing what you want to see. Unfortunately, that is a constant theme in a BBC NI that tries to drag Northern Ireland back into the sectarian past and the gutter. An infamous gentleman recognized this 20 years ago when he joked that outbreeding Unionists may be an enjoyable pastime for those who have the energy, but it hardly amounts to a political strategy. For an increase or decrease in the population to be a threat to anyone, let alone the state, implies that they are a homogeneous mass, like ants or bees. In spite of BBC NI's efforts, this could not be further from the truth, as can be demonstrated by the fact that the majority of people, 39% in NI, do not identify as either nationalist or unionist. These people, and the 33% unionists, are not served by BBC NI, who would rather live in the sectarian past. People, all people, are interested in how different decisions impact on their finances, their freedoms, education, health and their children's prospects. This requires objective, honest, informed, unbiased and investigative reporting, not fed a diet of tribal religious propaganda, to achieve the vociferous minority's dream, of a united Ireland. Even with a previous history of injecting his own prejudices into interviews, this embarrassing celebration of a presenter, gushing about a sectarian headcount and corrupting history, was hard to watch. The God a person chooses to commit to, or not, or the way they choose to worship that God, is an extremely personal thing and no one has the right to stereotype them for their choice. For those of you in despair, Not knowing what the truth is in this malaise of claims and counterclaims, the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey in 2019 actually asks the correct questions and is worth investigating for yourself. Year, 2019. Module, Political Attitudes. Variable, UNITID. The first question. Generally speaking, do you think of yourself as a unionist, a nationalist, or neither? Unionist, 33%. Nationalist, 23%. Neither, 39%. Other, 2%. Don't know, 3%. A significant majority in Northern Ireland have no affiliation to either the British identity or the Irish, they are Northern Irish. The low point was the presenter promoting and repeating as an established fact, the Republican trope, on the creation of the Northern Ireland state, while interviewing.
In 1921, Northern Ireland, as you know very well, 101 years ago, was established 2-1 in favour of Protestants over Catholics, a baked-in majority, done quite deliberately. Now there are more Catholics than Protestants, and that is a seismic change.
I'm sorry, Mark. 100 years ago, Northern Ireland was formed by those people who did not want to leave the United Kingdom when the rest of Ireland wanted to leave the United Kingdom. Now, I think when you look at these figures, there's no big indication here towards Irish unity. There's no difference here from what the Assembly election results said. Of course there is work to do. Unionism is very aware of that, and we will be working hard at that. But I come back to the figure of 29% of people identifying as Irish only. That is not any indication of a progression towards a United Ireland position. When you look at people identifying as British and Northern Irish or Northern Irish, very, very clear that that is significantly larger than the other group. So we can use these figures in various ways. But I would really caution people. This idea of talking about Catholics and Protestants as if it's some kind of a sectarian battle is incredibly reductive and, quite frankly, I think insulting to the people of Northern Ireland. You can be any religion and believe in this United Kingdom, and that's
Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland's creation were violent and traumatic for the whole population of Ireland, but the subsequent disagreements since the end of British rule should not have come as a surprise to anyone. The only time Ireland has ever been united was achieved forcibly under British rule. The cultural differences and freedoms in what was a fledgling republic and Northern Ireland were massive. Republicans can't have it both ways. If Northern Ireland's creation was sectarian, then the Republic of Ireland's creation was also sectarian. They did sign the agreement and create the conditions for it. Eamon de Valera worked closely with the Catholic Church to formulate the 1937 Constitution, which imposed religious restrictions in medicine, education and employment, making the Republic of Ireland one of the most Catholic countries in the world. In any democracy you have a choice: follow the religious zeal of the majority, or accommodate the ethnic mix of your population, taking the minority population with you. By governments ignoring the minority in the Republic, and subsequently in NI, largely because of abstentionism, the road to violence was laid. Leading up to, and in the early years of both states, nobody comes out well. To single Northern Ireland out, in this political and religious malaise, in an attempt to rewrite history, stigmatize and delegitimize it, because the population in Northern Ireland exercised their democratic right to protect their rights in a violent conflict and stay in the UK, is pure propaganda. Fortunately, a unionist was present on this occasion to correct him, but again his propaganda delivery to his chosen audience was done and no doubt will continue. BBC NI seems to follow the doctrine that because NI and the Republic occupied the same land mass, there is an inevitability that the people of NI will eventually realize their mistake, embrace the Republican dream, accepting the financial hit in income and lifestyle necessary to join the Republic. Absolute rubbish for Catholic, Protestant, Hindu or none. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, though. The scaremongers are triumphant about the sectarian aspects of a historical healthy growing Catholic community in Northern Ireland. I would be much more impressed if they were showing even some concern for a population that was actually in trouble because of discrimination. The Protestant population in the Republic of Ireland suffered a massive population drop from 10% to 3%, entirely attributable to religious fanaticism and discrimination, in some cases taking the form of a pogrom, all totally ignored and buried. A native of the Republic of Ireland, Robin Berry, with support from Professor Brian Walker, Queen's University, in his book Buried Lives, The Protestants of Southern Ireland reports. In 1911 there were about 300,000 native Irish Protestants in the 26 counties, but there was a drop of 175,000 from 1911 to 2011, or about a 60% drop in the Protestant population. Propaganda is the skill of choosing the supporting information for your cause, concealing the contradicting and distorting absolutely everything, totally regardless of truth or facts. BBC&I should be actively part of the healing process, not part of the problem. Presumably reconciliation is part of a public service media like BBC&I's mandate. Or is it? Where was BBC management when this stuff is being aired? Do they not watch their own programme, or are they in agreement? In which case they shouldn't be managing a Northern Ireland public service organisation. Once again religion is brought up in BBC&I as a point of contention and division in the community. In a country where the majority of the population have moved on, why not try focusing on the present, with things that matter now, or at the very least avoid presenting contested facts that you know will cause offence to one side of the community or another. Not a good look for any television company, particularly a publicly funded TV station like BBC&I. 6. BBC&I suffer from the same problem as the BBC. Their current affairs programs are dominated by left-wing propagandists who are traditionally Republican. Unlike Great Britain, the left and right wings in NI are not averse to killing people. BBC and GB have promised to sort this issue out. It is now time it was sorted out in NI. Interviewers use their position to spread propaganda to support of their Irish Republican views in interviews, by making incorrect assertions and not challenging contentious statements from Republican-minded interviewees. For example, the interview with Mr. Leo Varadkar TD. Multiple misleading assertions were made, too long to replay here, but notice when Mr. Varadkar gets frustrated and ultimately makes the accusation of BBC Northern Ireland bias. There is absolutely no reaction. It did not seem to bother him that the BBC had been accused of discrimination.
As a party is that when we're attacked, we'll defend ourselves. If our party is attacked, we'll defend our record. If individual members of the party, our politicians are attacked, we will defend ourselves. But, you know, I find it a little bit strange is that when Fine Gael defends itself against Sinn Féin, somehow that's our strategy. But Sinn Féin can attack, criticise, be negative about absolutely everyone. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Unionists, you name it, and never have to come up with solutions, never have to actually say how they do things better. It seems like a double standard.
7. Unionist perspective is regularly asked for, and provided by a citizen of the Irish Republic. This is the equivalent of asking a Russian journalist to interpret the behavior of the Ukraine population. Not a good idea, hasn't worked well so far. According to this so-called informed journalist, the Unionist population has a shorter attention span than their Republican equivalent, who have a very long history or political abstentionism throughout NI history. The last one was for 3 years. Asked for his opinion, his prediction of the first Unionist political abstention was that it will be over in a few months, according to him by October 2022. As financial issues arising because of inflation will erode the grassroots Unionist support they currently have for the action. Hardly an objective opinion, wishful thinking or propaganda, take your pick. Or is there a difference?
What's your sense, Enda, of how much pressure the DUP is under to move? Because we just heard from Colin McGrath tonight saying the reason the situation is as difficult as it is and the problems in the health service are as dire as they are at least in part because of the DUP's decision not to go back in and reform the executive.
Well, I don't think right now the DUP feels under pressure, because they say they're hearing it on the doorsteps that people are telling them to stand firm, to stay strong, see this process through. We've also had recently, of course, the poll in the Belfast Telegraph saying that unionists were comfortable with the position adopted by the DUP. Now, I think that picture could change come the autumn time, whenever people start, after their summer break, if you like, starting to assess their finances, see, for instance, the cost of living crisis starting to bite. Then you might see some pressure coming on the DUP. And I think there is a sense within government that perhaps whenever the legislation moves to the House of Lords, that could be this junction, if you like, where the DUP might well decide to support this election of a Speaker, paving the way for the return for the Assembly, because we do know that they're going to do that return.
Straight out of the Putin propaganda playbook, demean your opposition's dedication, character and resolution, stamina, heritage, and promote your own superiority. This is all pure fantasy, designed to encourage Republicans. As you can see from the Republican gentleman nodding in agreement, but with absolutely no evidence or basis in fact. There was no unionist representation in the whole program to give balance to what is not only a seriously ridiculous proposition, but is also extreme sectarian racial profiling, by a BBC spokesperson and employee, with no knowledge of the Northern Ireland unionist population, to even base this sectarian opinion on. 8. The law in Northern Ireland requires equal representation of both sections of the community, which by any measure is not happening currently in BBC Northern Ireland current affairs reporting, so they are in breach of the legislation. 9. The journalists invited to take part in BBC Northern Ireland are largely from thinly veiled Republican backgrounds, with one exception: any loyalist journalists invited a self-confessed liberal unionist, even on occasions liberal unionists employed by Republican newspapers and a vested interest. Not quite a level playing field. This has been detailed in previous videos, so I will not waste time here, repeating it. Expecting the public to accept that while they are not allowed to redesignate themselves in the census without the authorities reclassifying them into a designation they didn't choose. A journalist, on the other hand, can change designation on BBC NI, by simply changing jobs from a Republican newspaper, promoting Republican ideology, to a liberal newspaper. This is sufficient qualification for them to appear on a BBC NI show, providing an opposition viewpoint and balance, to an advocate of extreme Republican ideology on the show. Ridiculous. It is simply a method of ensuring that the show sticks to the Republican agenda, but creates the illusion of balance. This happens on a weekly basis. On some occasions the whole panel is made up of representatives with a thinly disguised Republican history. It is BBC NI's responsibility to ensure their programs represent the whole community, and that those invited on to represent a community actually do. In Northern Ireland there is a joke which covers this ridiculous situation. A gentleman mentions in conversation that he is an atheist. The response from the people he is talking to is, "But are you a Catholic or Protestant atheist?" Sad, isn't it? There is nothing wrong with a program espousing Republican views, but for every Republican program there should be one espousing the benefits of Northern Ireland staying independent, with the practical benefits of being part of the United Kingdom, the financial, social and economic pitfalls of a united Ireland. Everyone paying the license fee is entitled to the same service. As a political anorak, I have watched over time as political reporting in BBC Northern Ireland has degenerated from a professional objective organisation, representing all sections of the community, to a thinly veiled Republican propaganda media outlet. As member of a growing section of the community, neither Irish or British, but a Northern Irish citizen, with no religious or political affiliations, the fastest growing section of the community, it's insulting to be ignored by BBC Northern Ireland. Presenters would have you believe there are only two communities. I want political programs to give me facts, details, not propaganda, information that I can depend on to make informed decisions, have a wide range of diverse input that is challenged vigorously, and a range of interview styles to avoid the interviewer becoming either lazy, routed in the past, manipulative, egotistical, stale or corrupt. allowing his own preferences and ego interfering with his professional obligations. It should not even be necessary to point out that all interviews should be free of discriminatory behavior. It is quite simply extremely lazy, institutionally sectarian and asking for trouble to allow one presenter with a historical association with one section of the community to dominate all political output in BBC Northern Ireland. A whole generation of young journalists from all sections of the community, but particularly unionists, are being cheated of their opportunity to progress in the media industry. Please give Northern Ireland a public television service that leaves the past behind, holds all politicians to account equally, serves all sections of the community, challenges propaganda, not perpetuate it, a service we can all be proud of,